I was one of those people that always knew they were an artist from the day I was born, practically. I was born and raised in Sacramento, California. My dad was a carpenter, and my mom was a seamstress. And so I came from a very working class family, and also this idea that work hard is something that is a wonderful thing. I was raised as a painter at California State University in Sacramento, CSUS, and at the time you were thinking that if you really want to be an artist, you're a painter, because the history of art is the history of painting, etc. And so I learned how to paint, and in the 70s, that was more of the photorealistic era. That taught me a lot in terms of technique and procedure, the correct way of doing things, the correct way of putting together a canvas and gessoing it and building the stretchers and the right way of applying paint and that kind of thing, and very structured, very how-to official stuff. But in terms of actually being more gestural, I really came across the frame of the painting as a stoppage. In other words, I really noticed that edge, and I went like that. I just completely stopped. Like I can't go further than this box. And I was really psychologically affected by the square. and so I thought to myself that if I was so affected by the edge, then I need to change the edge. At school, I watched this one artist. His name is Robert Brady, and he's now a good friend of mine. But the thing is, at the time, he was a teacher at Sac State, and I watched him work on his work, and also Peter Vandenberg. They were both teachers there, and they were working with clay, and I could see the malleability of the material, and not so much what they were making per se, but the thing is that they showed me the possibility of this material, this clay stuff is what I could see using that. By slinging the clay, I could make my own canvases that aren't necessarily the square. There could be amorphous shapes. And Robert Arneson, who is my teacher, my favorite person was William Wiley. I love Wiley, and you could see how, in retrospect, why I would love Wiley. But Wiley, when I got there, he wasn't teaching anymore. He had just retired. You got accepted into graduate school under Arneson, then you're basically going to be his TA. But when I was his TA, I literally didn't know how to do anything more than throw a slab. I mean, literally, that is it. That is my whole sum total of knowledge in ceramics was how to throw a slab. That's just it. End of story. Period. Because that's all I needed to do in clay. That's all I did in clay. Basically, that's it. And so I had 2 years of really learning, like a touch of the learning curve. But I basically lived in my studio for 2 years. I mean, it was at that time that I was thinking in terms of what was my work supposed to be about. And it's interesting because my work has always been figurative, with the exception of making these books, these open books. I came across this idea of making these open books. And the reason why is because I've always loved found objects. I've always, when I was a child, my pockets were full of things that I would pick up during the day. You know, rocks and sticks and whatever. You know, my mom would always say, God, you're ruining your pants. You know, my mom was a seamstress, right? You're ruining your pants. Because she probably made this pants that I was wearing. And so I would always have these things. I mean, and to this day I'm like that, except I'm a little bit more selective now about what I pick up. But the thing is that I had like all these, buckets full of objects. And I think, what am I going to be doing? What am I going to do with these things? How am I going to make them useful? How am I going to incorporate those in my work? Because I would love to put them in my work. And I came across this idea that if I made an open book, and I put these things on and organized them in a linear fashion, then they would look kind of like a hieroglyphic kind of iconographic language. And I just did it as a lark. And they were really successful. A lot of people really got involved with them. but they're excellent examples of duality in art. You'll end up comparing this piece to this piece, before and after, left and right, good and bad, desire and reality. You know, these things, you know, they have like a nice polar kind of device. So in a funny way, they're not figurative, but they are figurative in that the book itself has personality. I'm almost like defensive about the concept of narrative because I don't have a true narrative. When you look at the work, often the work has no story per se that I can write out. What happens is there's the idea of the things that they're doing and the things that they're holding, the way that they're interacting, which creates the metaphor and the symbol. So one thing about that is the idea that what I often say is that I'm not a narrative artist. I'm somebody who's looking at the nature of narrative. By the nature of narrative, I mean that if I place the figure here, looking over there, holding that thing, then our eye will go 1, 2, 3, and as that combination, we will think certain ways. The sculpture makes the viewer want to know a narrative because of the dynamics that they are involved in. Not that long ago, I kind of came into a real a time of really of a lot of difficulty with my work. I started thinking too much about what I was supposed to make. What was I supposed to be making? Am I on track? Does it look like I know what I'm doing? And those are comments that you ask. Those are insecurity kinds of ways of thinking. You know, it's like, and what happens is that it stops you from making because you start second guessing yourself. And I've made enough work now that I can just say, I'm just trying to get something interesting going every day, and that's my job. My job is to make work that I think is interesting, because if I don't think it's interesting, I'm not going to be making the work. It's going to be another job that I have to do. It's going to be the equivalent of me blowing the leaves in my backyard. A lot of times I'll read a poem, and there's a line in the poem, and I think that's a great title for a piece, but what's the piece look like? You know, that kind of thing. And then a lot of times just the vice versa. I'll make a piece and I don't know what the title should be, so it's like, but the title to me has to be just, it's just almost as important as the piece itself. It has to, because it guides your mind. That a lot of times the titles are more poetic than prose, I guess you could say. And that's another thing too. I think about what is the new composition. So that's very structured, very structural, you know, composition. You know, it's like really nailing down how the eye should move in this new thing. Then I think, okay, but that's not enough. Now I have to bring in, not necessarily found objects, but I have to bring in the unknown. How is that going to be? Another element. If you really want to make good art, you have to be around when it happens. For about 14 years or so, I've really been involved with the inner ear. And the thing is that when I first saw the inner ear, I didn't know what it was. I saw an illustration of it. And to me, it looked like a seahorse or an alien or a fetus or something that I couldn't understand, but it had a lot of motion to it. And I later realized by investigation that this was actually an inner ear, and how an inner ear is important to have balance. It's not necessarily only for hearing, it's also to keep your balance. And I thought it was a great metaphor, especially at the time when I was really interested in knowing how to balance my life. So it was perfect personal symbol. The thing is that over time I've also been able to mutate it into other kinds of personal symbols, such as my conscience.
Being raised Roman Catholic, there's this one thing that we always are confronted with, was the idea of the Jesus story and how that's considered the passion play in terms of the crucifixion, etc. So, also being raised in an artist, you learn when you're studying the Renaissance that's also the story that you hear a lot about. And there's so basically there's the concept of what is passion, and it was interesting to me to see that I have a different idea of what passion is, and so my form of showing that idea is a white fire. In other words, a fire that doesn't burn, but more of about the idea of something that's necessary to be an artist. I started making figures that had long noses just for the sake of abstracting the face. Often I'll do that. I'll make pieces that have kind of mutated ears or funny eyes. In this case, I was making long noses. And when I started doing that, people were saying, "Oh, you're making Pinocchios." And I thought, no, I'm not really making Pinocchios, really. But then I thought, it sounded like I was being in denial. And so I thought I better read up on Pinocchio. And the thing I realized from reading up on him was that it's not Walt Disney, it's Carlo Collodi who invented Pinocchio in the late 1800s. And Carlo Collodi was the writer of children's story. And the thing about the original story is that it's more like what we understand, like the Brothers Grimm, where it's like, are you sure this is for children? And there's a lot of very strange psychological things that Pinocchio actually goes through. It's not just a father-son, Geppetto-Pinocchio relationship. It's actually more of a male-female relationship that he has with the blue-haired fairy, and how she changes 3 times from a child to a sexual female to a mother figure in all the same book. So it's extremely different than what we understand. And the thing is that I also, once again, can see a relationship to ideas that I have in terms of a self-portrait.